Have you ever thought about getting your small product into production but are worried about the cost of the big cloud providers? Or maybe you think your current cloud service is over-architected and costing you too much? Well, in this episode, we interview Michael Kennedy, author of Talk Python in Production, a new book that guides you through deploying web apps at scale with right-sized engineering. This is Talk Python to Me, episode 531, recorded November 26, 2025. Welcome to Talk Python to Me, a weekly podcast on Python. This is your guest host, Christopher Trudeau. Follow me on Blue Sky, where I'm trudeau.dev. You can follow the podcast or this week's guest on Mastodon, at Talk Python for the show and at mkennedy for the guest, both on fosstodon.org. And keep up with the show and listen to over 9 years of episodes at talkpython.fm. If you want to be part of our live episodes, you can find the live streams over on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel at talkpython.fm/YouTube and get notified about upcoming shows. Michael, welcome to Talk Python to Me. You know, I looked it up. You've been on the show more than anyone else. But in case there's new listeners, tell us a bit about yourself.
Incredible. Good to be here with you, Christopher. So, a bit of a turn of the tables, I would say. And it is, long-time listeners, I'm sure they know all the little details because I work them in here and there. I think that's kind of fun to just make things personal. But I've also said this on the show, and I'm sure it's a surprising fact that you know as well, but over half of the people in the Python space have only been here for 2 years.
Yeah, I keep seeing that stat. Yep.
That's crazy, right? So even if people, I told this story about my background 5 years ago, like those people weren't here, like half of them. So crazy stuff. All right, so my backstory, I thought I would be a mathematician. I studied math and stuff like that in college, was working on my PhD, and started doing a bunch of work with silicon graphics, mainframe, supercomputer type stuff so that I could do my math research. And I realized, wow, this programming stuff's way more fun than math. How do I change gears? And so that was like 1998, 99. Haven't looked back. I've been programming since then and super fun, couple of languages. And around 10, 11 years ago, started Talk Python. A year after that, quit my job, made Talk Python my full-time job, started offering courses as well. That's something that people don't necessarily know, that sometimes they'll ask, well, what do you do for your job, actually? I'm like, well, we're doing it. So anyway, that's me. A super fan of Python, super fan of programming. Every day I wake up just like, wow, how awesome is today that, like, look at all the new stuff that came out that we learned that we can do, right? Like new libraries, AI stuff these days.
Yeah, there's always plenty to talk about.
It's incredible times.
And you've added a new trophy to the mantle, I guess. You've written a book.
I have written a book, and that's a little bit. I'll put it this way: it's not something I ever saw myself doing, but I'm really excited that I did. And yeah, I spent a couple of months properly writing it. Like really putting my energy in. And like all projects, you think you're about done.
That first 80% is nothing like the last 80%.
No,
yes. Yeah.
And the last 5% is long. And it's not just the book. It's like, okay, well, where am I going to sell it? Okay, well, Amazon, and then I'll self-publish, or do I use a publisher? And you end up self-publishing it, but then you're like, how do I, all these things you learn for the first time, like how do I get it into Amazon to sell even? And there's a bunch of decisions and
I can I can tell you, even with having taken the publishing route, it's no easier. It's just that it goes dark for 2 months, and then all of a sudden it's like, you need to do this by yesterday. So yeah, it's not necessarily an advantage either way, I think.
Yeah. I was really on the fence, and I thought, look, let me just try this myself. I got a few podcast listeners. I can let them know about it, and
an audience helps.
I honestly think it was probably the right choice for me.
And for those who haven't come across it yet, do you want to give us the one paragraph version?
Yeah. So the book is called Talk Python in Production. There are other books that are, I'm pretty sure one is called Python in Production, or other things about how do you get your Python app into production. But this is Talk Python in Production because it's sort of a dual role storytelling vehicle. Obviously, it's nonfiction, it's a technical book. But the idea was, let me tell not a generic story of how you might run some of your Python code in production, mostly APIs, web apps, databases, like that kind of stuff, right? Not a general story of that, but my story, right? I've been on this journey of not complete noob, but pretty significantly lost getting my original Python app out into the world to pretty confident running stuff in, I think, a simpler than usual way, in a good way.
Right. One of the things I really liked about the book is it's not quite changing gears, but you do a nice mix of sort of the decision-making process versus the here's exactly what I did. And so you get a little bit of both. And honestly, the decision-making process is something I find often isn't there in a lot of work. Your standard blog post is always, well, and then add exactly this to exactly this file. But I think I really sort of enjoyed and this is what I tried, and this is why I changed. And you're very kind of humble about it. Like a lot of folks who write this kind of content, it's thou shalt do this. And you're like,
yeah, this is the way I've told you.
Yeah, this worked for me. And so I really like the fact that you've kind of blended that in. What made you decide to do this like that? So you said you didn't really have the itch to go down the path. So what?
I'm not sure I didn't have the itch. I just didn't think that it was something I was capable of.
Ah, I see. Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Not that I didn't think if I literally took 2 years off my life and went into like a cabin, Thoreau style or something, and I could come out with a book, I'm pretty sure. But given all the constraints of like, I have a family and I got to keep Talk Python running, like in that sense, I didn't think I would be able to do it. But
yeah, it's perseverance more than anything else, I think. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, so why did I write it? Two reasons. One, I think it's an interesting story, and I thought people would enjoy hearing it, like the personal side that you mentioned a little bit. I thought people would appreciate that. And maybe more significantly, I feel like a lot of the advice out there in the tech space in general, but for now we're focused on like, how do I deploy my app, sort of like Python plus DevOps type of thing. But I think a lot of the advice out there is a little bit of a flex in the sense that, oh, look at this. We're using these 7 services and then this technology, and then we're auto scaling it with that, and then we have these logs pumped over to this other thing. And you're like, whoa, okay, that's kind of cool. But a lot of people who just have an app and they just want to go from like, it works on my machine to look what I made, they see that and go, I can't do that. You know what? It's not for me. It's just like, I can't spend $500 on this infrastructure, and I don't feel worthy if I don't have all, like completely geo-distributed redundant databases. And like, you don't need that. You know what I mean? And people keep asking me like, hey, Michael, can you give me some advice? I'm like, well, not that. And finally I'm like, let me just tell the story, And so that was a big motivation.
You see it in industry a lot. It's sometimes referred to as, resume-based architecture, right? Like it's do we need this, or is this because I'm trying to learn?
Yes.
And I think there's always that, some of it's aspirational, right? We will be Netflix. And so, we need to be on every continent and all the rest of it. And
Right. It's very aspirational. It's like, I'm going to build this app, and the reason I'm building it is it's going to take off. And that day when the hockey stick hits, I'm ready.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's also I think there's a lack of recognition of the cost of it, both in energy and money. Energy as in human effort. I'm not talking about electricity. of the next 1%, right? So like getting from 90% uptime to 95% uptime costs something. Getting from 95 to 96 costs more than that. And getting from
Yeah.
96, like, and once you're getting into like the 4 nines, 5 nines thing, and then, Cloudflare goes down and you're all screwed anyways, right? So
It's so ironic. It is 100% ironic that you take all these steps and you employ all these services, and it's the complexity of those services that went down. Like,
Yeah.
This show will come out in a couple of weeks, but we're just on the eve of basically 3 weeks of important things going down. First AWS,
yeah,
then Azure, and then GitHub,
yeah,
and then Cloudflare. So let's put that as 4 within 3 weeks,
yeah.
right? And the
it's-
AWS one was like, the reason it went down is DynamoDB had some sort of DNS problem.
Yeah.
Even if you're not using that, the thing you're using, like Lambda, depends upon DynamoDB for itself to work. So it was just like a cascade of kabang, right? And that's a little bit of this complexity. Like, the more complexity you buy in, even if it's not yours, it is yours in a sense.
Yeah, and there's always humans involved, right? So you're always there's always fallibility somewhere, right? Although one of the arguments I have seen recently in response to the Cloudflare outage is the good news is if you're, I saw some articles that were like, well, you shouldn't be dependent on Cloudflare, and then I saw the counter articles were basically, you know what? When half the internet's down, no one's hassling you that your app is down because half the internet's down. So
yeah, that's true.
There is an excuse when it isn't your fault. So anyways,
that is true, and you don't see what Cloudflare saved people.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
I'm not using Cloudflare. I actually use bunny.net, but CDNs make it possible for your app to survive these spikes in ways that they very well may not without, and certainly the DDoS type of stuff that they protect against.
Well,
right.
And I use it simply for certificates. Like Google decided everyone shall be HTTPS, even my sites that don't need it. And rather than try to figure out automation for Let's Encrypt has gotten a lot better. But when I first started it, it was like, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this, and then the cron job could go down, or it's like, or I can stick Cloudflare in front of it, and I never have to think about it ever again, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, there's a little bit of value that way. So
yeah, there definitely is. Another thing I want to kind of bring back a little bit is you open this segment on, you said, like, I shared the human side of the story in kind of a humble way. Like, that was certainly something that was one of the main goals. Like I said, I think it's just a continuation of the podcast, right? Yeah. I started the podcast 10 years ago, and I'm like, when I got into Python, there were no Python podcasts. There had been, but there were none at the time. And I'm like, there's all these cool libraries. I want to hear the stories and the humanity. And you go to the documentation, and you're like, cool technology, sterile as can be. Yeah. And the reason technology is interesting is not just because there's an API I can call this, but it's like, it's a journey and it's a story. And it's, so I just wanted to do that again in the book.
It's all problem solving, right? And there has to have been a problem for someone to want to solve it, which means there's got to have been people involved in trying to figure out what that is. Yeah.
I think a lot of people maybe, I don't know, I shouldn't speak for people. It seems to me, though, like a lot of people, they look at a technology and they just assess it as a dry, sterile sort of thing on its own. That was created in a context, right? Why was Celery created?
Yeah.
Not just so I can send events to it and add more complexity and asynchronous. It solved a real problem. And if you hear and you understand and you follow that journey, you're like, I see this is where this comes from and why it exists. Then you can decide, is it for me?
Yes.
Right?
Well, and I think it doubly so in the open source space because this is all volunteer work. And so knowing a little bit about who's doing what and humanizing that a little bit, I think
their motivation.
Yeah, and it's also easier to be grateful, right? Like this isn't some soulless corporate machine. There was a reason behind this and a driver behind it. So you've inside the book you've added a couple things that are a little sort of non-standard, like the audio reader briefs and the galleries. You want to give a quick rundown and speaking of motivation, what motivated you to include those things?
So let me describe what they are first, because they are
Yeah.
weird, but they're weird in a good way, I think. So if you go to the book, my vision was somebody's going to be reading this, very likely on a Kindle, and if I go and put really nice diagrams, pictures, whatever, how good is that going to look in a Kindle Paperwhite, black and white? You know what I mean? Like, how hard is that going to be to read? I think it's going to be hard, is what I decided. And so what I ended up doing is I said, okay, how can I make it better for people so that when they want to work with code, it's not trapped inside your Kindle or your iPad, Apple Books, or wherever you read it, but it's super accessible, right? So what I did is I created some things I called galleries, and there's a code gallery, a figure gallery, and a links gallery. And these are just like, they're kind of like an index of those things. So like the links one just says, hey, here's all the URLs that we talked about in chapter 10 or chapter 11, and just the sentence that contains them. So instead of trying to go back through and flipping through the book, like, where was that thing they talked about, right? Like, no, you just go to the gallery and you click on the chapter, or you just do Command F and there it is, you know what I mean? And also especially for the figures, like it has like 2,000 or 4,000 by whatever level pictures that you're not even allowed to put into like a Kindle book. They're like, no, we're going to rescale those images for you down to something fuzzy, right? So if you want to read like little tiny text, I put it there. So that's the galleries. And I was just, maybe a little bit more backstory here is, when I wrote this, I've worked with other type of editing things and editing tools. I'm just like, I need to write this and I need to get this done in a super fluid way. So I'm just going to write in Markdown. Just write in Markdown. And so what I did is, of course, there's book publishing things that you can put Markdown into and so on. But I'm like, I'm just going to write one Markdown file per chapter and then write some Python program to assemble that in interesting ways.
Right.
And then turn that into an EPUB or PDF or Kindle or whatever through something called Pandoc. Are you familiar with Pandoc?
I've heard of it, yeah.
If you go and look, for people who don't know what Pandoc is, if you go look at Pandoc, it has right on the web page, it has this like fuzzy thing on the right. It's like gray fuzzy. And you're like, what is that? This thing on the right shows you all the formats that go in and all the formats that can come out. And it's insane. Like, you can't even, the lines connecting the graphs of these things, it's just a black blob. Like, right. I could put a haddocked document, whatever the heck that is, it convert that to a DocBook 4.
Right.
I mean, it's insane. Okay, yeah. So what I did is I built this simple Python thing that reassembles Markdown in certain ways, and then feed the final thing that I built into Pandoc to get the different ebook formats.
Right. Okay.
But then it occurred to me, like, so I didn't start out with these gallery type things or other stuff, but I'm like, well, this is just Python against Markdown. Surely I can start pulling out all the links and pulling out the images and then writing them somewhere else and then just committing that to GitHub. So once, it's kind of just the standard story of Python or programming in general, but I think it's extra common in Python. It's like, I started solving the problem with Python, and once that was in place, it's like the next block and the next thing is just like, that's easy now, and that's easy. And these three things are also easy. Let's just do that and just keep adding to it. So that's where they came from, is one, wanting to make sure people had a good experience with like code, resources, pictures, and so on. But also it's just kind of following the lead of like, hey, let's just keep going.
Well, and it's one of the beauties of an ebook. If dead tree copies, those things cost money. And so it's like, oh, I've got a great idea for 6 more appendices. And that's when you start going, oh, wait a second, I'm not going to add 300 pages to a 200-page book.
Exactly.
With an ebook, you can go, oh yeah, here we can make this referenceable in a couple different ways.
Right, yeah. It's like it duplicates the images into, maybe 20 more pages or something, but it's an ebook. Who cares?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Over the history of the show, I think I've become familiar with your AI journey. And recently it sounds like you've bought. You're fairly big proponent. That being said, there's still a Made by Humans logo inside.
Yeah.
What? So
You go to the.
I'm going to put you on a
I
spot.
even do it. Put me on
Do
the
you
spot.
believe in it or not?
Do I believe it or not?
So what? Why? Why
It's a
Made
good
by
question.
Humans?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think there's a weariness of content generated by AI or assisted by AI meant to attract attention and build authoritative
Yeah.
feelings about a thing when that authority or that skill set is not necessarily yours, right? And that I still very much do not like, right? If I wanted to create a blog, I mean, I guess I could do it. It'd be a fun experiment, I guess, in sort of a evil way. Like, what if I just go create a completely random blog and I just have chat just bust out an article twice a day, every day of the thing that's on the top of Hacker News or something? Just like
Right.
you could do that. And it might even be interesting. I don't really even know, but I don't want it. I don't want that. Right.
Yeah.
And for this, I wanted to share my story, not have AI create a book that has bullet points of my story, right?
Right. Yeah.
So for me, it was important to like write this. I wrote it 100% by Michael, right? It took me a lot of work. I know like it got posted on like Reddit and I think Hacker News somewhere. There was a bunch of and they're like, "Oh, this thing is definitely just AI generated." I'm like, you know what? There was a lot of months that I spent on this that felt not AI generated to me.
If it makes you feel any better, I've had actually comments pop up on some of my video courses claiming that my voiceover was AI. So that's just the world we live in now.
It's the world we live in, and there's not a lot you can do with it. So just kind of put a little bit of a pushback against that. I did put like a prefix sort of thing and a label that says "Made by Humans." And what's really funny is I don't know if I can actually find that section. I don't think I can on just the web part. But I made a picture. Maybe I did. Humans? No. Anyway, I made a picture that I drew. I'm a big fan of Pixelmator Pro. I went into Pixelmator Pro and I drew it. And they said, proof that this is AI generated? Look at that stupid Made by Humans graphic. It's clearly AI generated. Like, it would be way better if it
wasn't
were.
generative, yes.
Okay, so how do I square that with me actually being quite a fan of AI stuff these days? Like, let's do like a looking back and then looking forward. So let's go back 30 years. I'm also a fan of using editors that when I hit dot, tell me what I can do with that function, class, variable, etc.
Right.
So I'm not constantly in the documentation, right? Does that make me not a programmer? I don't think so. I'm still writing code. I'm still thinking architecture. I'm just not in the documentation constantly. And honestly, I maybe don't memorize every little function and field of everything in the standard library, right? It's fine. That's not where our time is best spent. Yeah. And I feel that way about AI programming. I think there are pitfalls and there are worrisome aspects of it, but you can use some of these agentic AI tools these days to think in so much higher level building blocks. Like, think of like, I'm working in a function and I'm writing this part, or I'm working in design patterns and I can think of these big sort of concepts. Well, with this AI stuff, you can just say, what if we had a login page? Oh, we have a login page. Now what other building block do I need? Like the building blocks are so big and like sort of non-critical software, non-super important software becomes so much cheaper than before. You're like, I wish I had a little utility or app that would do this, but it just definitely doesn't justify 2 weeks of work to have it. Like, what if it was a couple of prompts in half an hour? Like, well, then I'll have it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that is transformative for how we work.
Yeah, so much of coding is boilerplate, right? So if we can figure out how to make that easier, then why not, right? And
yeah,
I haven't got there with it myself. I don't know whether I will. I'm definitely a little more suspicious of it than you are, but I copy and paste code all the time, and
Yeah.
it's not like I'm like, oh, I have to hand tune that. No, it's like, oh, I got to copy something that does that, right?
Yeah.
And it's the
Let me
same thing.
give
It's
you
the
a
same
concrete
thing.
example because I think it's easy to talk in generalizations and people are like, well, that's not for me, a bunch of AI
Right.
slop, which is fair. But I'll give you an example. One thing I'm like, this was just such a nuisance and I'm going to fix it. So when I first built TalkPython, the website 10 years ago, Bootstrap was all the rage. Not modern Bootstrap, like old Bootstrap, right? Which they've completely redone the way that you have to structure your HTML and CSS completely, incompatibly, several times since then. And until very recently, until this summer, every time I wanted to add a feature or an aspect, like for example, this whole section that hosts the book, right? I want to add that. Well, you know what I had to do? I had to go write like 10-year-old Bootstrap. And I'm like, oh, I hate it so much. There's so much nicer tools I could be doing this. But there's 8,000 lines of HTML and almost as many CSS. Like,
Right.
does it justify me rewriting that much UI
Yeah.
so that I can feel a little bit better and use a little bit nicer UI tooling? No, it definitely doesn't.
Right.
And so for a couple of years, I'm like, oh, I wish I could do something else, but it's not worth it. And then I was sitting on my porch, little back area with my computer in the summer hanging out. I'm like, you know what? I bet Claude could do it. Hey, Claude, rewrite all of this site. Make a plan and rewrite it. Move it from Bootstrap 3 to Bulma, which is like simple Tailwind, and just completely do it. 4 hours later, the whole thing was redone, like 20,000 lines of edits
Wow.
done. And it wasn't perfect. I had to go, you messed up a little bit here, and actually that was right, but that doesn't look good anymore. So could you actually just make it look, you know what I mean? But I mean, it was like half a day. That work was done.
Right.
And that
And there's no
that
way
is a
that would have
different
been half
level.
a day.
No, it would have been weeks to a month, and
Yeah.
it's the worst kind. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, here's how the grid system used to work. Let me restructure the HTML. Oh, you lost a div? Whoopsie. Now how are you going to untangle this? You know what I mean? Like really, really not good stuff. And you can just turn these tools on it, and I'm like, love it or hate it. That is a skill and a power and a tool that is unlike things we've had before. And so when I started having some of those kinds of experiences, I'm like, all right, I need to pay attention to this. I honestly think a lot of these AIs and LLMs, they're kind of copyright theft and other types of things. And there's the environmental aspect and all that. But these, the thing is out of the box. Pandora is on the loose, right? So given that you're putting your head in the sand, it's not going to make it go away. Should you use it or not? Like, it's a very powerful tool. And so that is what I'm excited about, but I'm not excited about when I go to YouTube and I see a video and you can just tell that it's a voiceover plus some or I go to read a blog and you can tell that it's like,
Yeah.
they didn't even put enough energy into, like, they spent less time writing than I have to read it. That's not right. There's something going wrong here.
Yeah, well, as with all tools, we'll figure out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah,
Those 8,000 files that you're talking about, though, those are 8,000 files you have and built over time.
Yeah.
I suspect
Lines, by the way, not
Lines.
files.
Yeah,
I think it's
yes.
a couple hundred files.
Okay.
Probably.
So that might be something that folks listening aren't really aware of, right? Like, you're not just the podcasts and the courses, but you're the guy behind the engineering behind all of it. So why do that? Why not, Squarespace or something along those lines? Didn't exist when you came out, but you get the idea. Like
Yeah.
why spin it up yourself? How did you get there?
So it's a good question. When I started, there were places I could have gone and hosted the podcast. They were very unappealing. Not in the sense like as a consumer of it, like they put your show there and the thing. Then they were really ugly. And they would do things like, next to your show, here's some other shows you might like. You're like,
Right.
no, no, I don't. I just got people to come to my page and you're sending them away. Like, don't do that. Right. But those sites are like Squarespace or whatever, and they're hosting a bunch of them. And so they want engagement on their platform broadly. They're not for you. So initially I thought, well, Plus, I don't have a ton of experience writing Python code. And if I'm going to do the podcast, the more I can get my hands on this stuff and get experience. So I just sat down and really in like 3 days, I wrote the Talk Python website. I'm like, I'm doing it this weekend. You know what I mean? I had a job at the time, so I'm like, I got to do it. It's a long weekend. We're doing it. And so I just sat there and cranked it out and really got a really good appreciation for building all the way to the end, like not 60% or following a demo, but like, no, here's a fully working app and all the little nuances. But then, honestly, that's like the genesis of the story that is the book is, well, now how do I get it out there? Well, I built it. It works great here locally. Now, like, where do I take it, right? And a lot of places said, well, you just fire up your Linux terminal and you SSH. And I'm like, these words are making me very nervous. I need them to not do, you need you to stop saying that,
Don't forget to swing the chicken over your head.
Exactly. So I actually started in Python Anywhere, even before Anaconda owned them, which was the selling point was you go to your browser, I think you give it a get URL, or maybe you go into a terminal and you do a get. I can't remember how it worked 10 years ago, but it was basically you go to the web page, you type in your domain, you get a terminal, which is basically an SSH connection, but in the terminal, and then you give it some commands, and then they manage it for you. And I'm like, okay, I don't really have to know any Linux. I just have to do the two things it says in the terminal. And then they keep it running, and they do the SSH key, the SSH certificates, the DNS, all that. I'm like, I can do this. And I got it going there, and I was really proud. And I ran Talk Python on basically Python Anywhere and SQLite for like 6 months. First 6 months. But then it occurred to me that Python Anywhere is not really intended to host production level applications. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me when I got an email from them one day. Again, this is pre-Anaconda. And what it said was, we're going to be down for 4 hours as we do some maintenance. I'm like, that's not going to be the best look for my podcast, which is just now starting to gain some traction and getting a lot of people talking on social media and saying, hey, there's a new podcast, you should check it out. I'm like, the 4 hours are not making me psyched. Like, I understand that things might have to reboot. They might be down for 30 seconds. But hours and hours seems a little like this is not really what they intend this for. It's like for hobbyists to put up a thing, and I probably don't belong there anymore.
And once you shifted, why not AWS or Azure or something like that?
So I looked around and I went to DigitalOcean. So I'd done stuff with both Azure and AWS. A little part that I left out about this like web journey is I had actually run some pretty big websites in both AWS and Azure, but they were Windows-based .NET type things, right? Mm-hmm. So literally GUI sort of configuration hosting them, or platform as a service. And I don't know, just I looked at both of them, especially Azure at the time. I'm like, well, this is complicated and like unnecessarily so. And I'm afraid I'm trading one level of complexity for another, and also really expensive, like no joke expensive. The podcast, like in terms of people viewing the pages, is nothing insane. I mean, it's certainly popular, but it's nothing like how are you going to handle that? But the amount of traffic the podcasts and courses do in terms of video and MP3s and even XML, like I think Talk Python ships about a terabyte of XML. I think about a terabyte of XML every month. Like, it's basically a distributed denial, a DDoS, and a welcome DDoS attack. Right. Because think how many podcast players are out there going, got a new one, got a new one, got a new one, got a new one, and each one of those requests is like a meg of XML or more. It's like got a new one, got a new one, got a new one, and so originally I was using S3 to ship the podcasts, certainly the courses, and my bill was well over $1,000 in just bandwidth.
Right.
And then I looked at DigitalOcean and I'm like, oh, you mean all that bandwidth is free? It's included? You get like terabytes of free traffic with DigitalOcean or Hetzner or some of these smaller ones. And I'm just like, yeah, this is better. Like, I don't know what this stuff for is here, where they charge, $100 a terabyte
Yeah,
just to ship stuff around. It's crazy.
I have found, particularly professionally, it's like, oh, you're going to charge me for how many DNS lookups there are. That doesn't seem like something I can predict. Like,
Yes, I know.
And quite frankly, if it reaches a certain level, I need you to turn it off because something's gone horribly awry.
Yeah.
So
There's certainly areas where the cloud can go like sideways. In the book, I mentioned a story about Kara, I believe, and that was this project that this woman, I think in Hong Kong or South Korea, I'm afraid I can't remember which. I think it's South Korea. Anyway, created this. She's a photographer and really hates AI generated art. So created this service that would say, hey, give me a piece of art and I'll tell you if it's AI generated or not, or something vaguely like this. And her thing took off in the App Store and was like number 6. And her cloud bill at Vercel was $96,000 in a week.
Right.
As not as a business, just as a human who built something fun as a side project. Like, oh my.
Yeah, and in fairness to a lot of those tools, they tend to have ways of saying, please limit this and do that.
Yeah.
They're not the default. And if you're not thinking about that problem and protecting yourself, you'd kind of hope that it would be the other way around. It should be, here's your cap. And if you want more than that, you need to do something about it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And to their fairness, they did send her a message saying, your bill is going way higher than you might expect. And like she didn't look at her email or something, but still. Right. And so one of the things that really appeals to me is when you choose something like a Hetzner or a DigitalOcean or something, and you say, I'm going to pay for the server, you're like, okay, that's $40 I'm committing to. Right. Maybe double that, whatever. But the bandwidth is basically free, or it's included, right? But for $40, it feels free. And then it's only going to cost as much as it costs. You might have to go, oh my gosh, it's too much traffic. We're going to have to deal with it. But it's the upper bound of those systems these days is so high.
Yes.
It is so high that we, back to that aspirational thing that you mentioned, right? Like the chances that you blow past what a $50 server can handle, you're going to be really popular. Yeah. With a SaaS or something.
You were joking earlier about SQLite. It's gotten so much better as well. And I'm not saying it's the answer to everything, but I could probably come pretty close to running your site now too. It's scary between the processor improvements and the improvements in the software. It's made a big difference for that kind of stuff. It takes very, very little hardware to handle something that's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I think the title of chapter 4 is one of my favorites. It gives a little hint as to what approach you took. The title is Docker. So what approach did you take?
You know what? I was really not wanting to do Docker. Genuinely. I mean that. And so what I did when I originally switched over to some VMs, I'm like, okay, the story I'm told of what the cloud is, I bought the EC2 story. Well, we've got all this extra capacity. Oh, instead of getting like really expensive, heavy metal, big metal sort of servers, you get a bunch of small ones and they're kind of like cheap and you just make them, throw them away, whatever, right? So I went and made a bunch of small servers in DigitalOcean. I think I had 8 servers at one point. And I thought, this is going to give me lots of isolation. If I got to work on this one thing, it won't mess with that. And then what I realized is they're interconnected enough, like that really... I end up just having to reboot 8 servers in an orchestrated way than managing. I'm like, this is just worse. I got to patch 8 servers instead of 1 now because this is not better. So how do I end up with Docker? I realized that it would be better to just have 1 server, and basically stepping back just a little bit, like what if you could completely isolate yourself from almost all the complexity of the cloud and all of their services and all that junk, and just say, I have a place where I can run apps that's got enough capacity that I can just keep throwing more apps in there if I want. And it doesn't have any tie-in with the specific APIs and services of a particular provider. So I said, well, what if I just get a big server and I just run all my apps in there? And if I want a database, I put the database there. If I want like a Valkey caching, I could put a Valkey caching, like things like that. And that's sort of as much autonomy as I can exert on running something in the cloud, right? It's almost like I went and got a big machine and stuck it in my closet,
Right.
but that's insane because you get $1 million networking equipment and, fail over. But that doesn't mean you have to go fully pass managed database, this other service. Like you could just say, just give me a Linux machine where I can then go do my hosting and all my apps and let them party and talk to each other and stuff in there, right? So then I thought, well, I don't have all these little servers for isolation. I'm not really sure I want to throw all this random stuff together, like completely just in the same soup in that one big server. And by the way, the big server right now that it's running has 8 cores, 16 gigs of RAM, and costs $30.
Right.
It comes with 2 terabytes, 4 terabytes of traffic, something like that. Lots. $400 of included bandwidth,
Right.
for $30. So I said, well, what if I took that over? Like autonomy is a big motivator of this whole journey as well. Like I don't want to be tied into all these different things. I just want a space where I have reliable compute and networking and Linux, and I can just do whatever. So then I said, all right, well, I better figure out some of the stuff with Docker just so that there's some isolation of all the different pieces living in the same space. So I forced myself to learn Docker, and what it occurred to me was, oh, Docker is just writing down in a file what I would normally have to type in the terminal to make the thing happen, except for I put run in front of the command, or copy instead of CP, and I get a repeatability.
And someone else has packaged a bunch of this stuff, so you don't have to do it yourself.
Exactly. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what all my concern was about, because it's not much more complicated. One of my concerns was sort of monitorability. Like if I just go there and I just create a bunch of virtual environments and run my code, I can actually go and see the source code. I can see the config files. I can see where the logs are being written, and I can sort of manage it through SSH. And I thought, well, if I put a bunch of disconnected Docker things together, that's going to be challenging. And I realized, actually, not really. It's like if you set it up the same, you could still tail all the logs. Yeah, and you can SSH into the containers if you really have to, look at something running inside them. Like, what is the process actually? I don't know. What does it do? How much memory is it using relative to other stuff? And I also talk about a bunch of tools for monitoring them.
Yeah. And so how has that changed over time? Like you started with some fairly bare bones. You've got some extra tools. What does that evolution look like?
Well, I used to rely more on whatever the cloud provider, DigitalOcean or Hetzner, offered. They always have like a metrics section, so I can go see, well, what's the CPU doing? What's the memory looking like over time? And that works okay. And if you've got one app that you're running there, you're like, okay, well, that must be how much memory the app is using. But right now, if I go to Talk Python and I ask, I think there are 27 different containers running.
Okay.
Which you can't ask how's the server doing and know very much about. It really matters much more. Well, it's busy, I get it, but which one is the problem, or which one is busy, or which one's using all them? So I started to look around. There's actually a bunch of recommendations that I have for the book. So one of them, the first one I used was this thing called Glances, and Glances is excellent. And by the way, Glances, the way they talk about often getting it, I think somewhere that they talk about installing it here probably, is often like apt install Glances or something like that, right? But a lot of these tools even have Docker versions, if you share the volumes and sockets just right, they function just the same. So you can say Docker run glances XYZ, and it doesn't even install, it doesn't even touch your one big server that is kind of like your building space. So it leaves it a little more pure, right? So glances is super cool. And what it does is if I open it up, is it gives you this really nice dashboard of what's going on with your app, like how your server, how much memory is being used, how much CPU is being used, how has that been over time, has there been like extended spikes, and so on. And one of the things that's new to Glances, and I don't think it's in this picture that's on their home screen. I'm pretty sure it is not. Oh no, it is. It just, mine is inverted because I have so many. It has a containers section. So when you run it, it actually shows you not just the processes, but also gives you a performance, memory, IO, etc. for all the running containers and their uptimes and those kind of things. So this is super cool. So you construct a certain Docker command, and then you have this running dashboard that just goes. So this is the first thing that I started with, and I really like that. But then I also found something called BTOP. Are you familiar with BTOP?
No, I haven't used this one.
Oh my gosh, BTOP is incredible. This is so good. It's really something. Zoom in on it. So this gives you like moving graphs over time of all sorts of things. It shows you like graphs of network, inbound, outbound traffic. It shows you the CPUs. It gives you a breakdown of like, here's all the different distributed work across your 8 CPU cores and over total. It's really something else. And so this one is really nice. You can configure the UI a lot to show, and you can zoom in on disk activity or whatever. This is really a nice way to view it. And again, when you run all these Docker containers, they feel like they're super isolated and tucked away. And from their perspective, they are. But when you look in the process list here, it just shows the process that Docker is running. So I have all my web apps and APIs and stuff setting a process name. So instead of just Python, it'll say like talk Python Granian Worker 1, talk Python Granian Worker 2, courses indexing service daemon. And then when you look into any of these tools, you can see, oh, exactly what is busy. And those are actually the names inside of Docker, but they still surface exactly like that to all these tools.
One of the things you said kind of hit home for me. Like it was subtle, and you kind of moved on, which was like if you interconnect it correctly, right? Like if you get the files and sockets going, this goes smoothly. And I think it's one of the things you've done very, very well in the book is sort of walking through that. Like as you talk about the different Docker configurations, like, okay, well, this is why we're putting this here rather than in the container. This is going to be shared. And, you know, and the reason for this, I assume some of that was experimental. You just sort of over time, you kind of went, oh, okay, wait, I need that somewhere else.
Yeah.
Or was it, you know, was there somebody's knowledge that you, depended on a lot there? How did you get there? How organic was the journey?
I would say half and half. Like some of it, for example, the Glances stuff. I just found when I went looking for it that there was like ways to install, and it just said, oh, you could just install it by running this Docker thing, and it's like a big long command. And I'm like, oh, that's cool, because it doesn't matter how long the command is. What I would do is I'll go into my .zshrc and say alias glances equals paste, and then I save that somewhere. And I couldn't tell you what it is at all. I just know it has to like it has a few things so it can like look back into the host to see, you know, what's running and so on. So a lot of it was like that, and then some of it was definitely, you know, 2 whole days of like, why won't that talk to that? Let me build it again. Let me do some more devote. You know what I mean? And eventually like, okay, all right. But once you get it kind of dialed, then once you get a little bit of it working, it's a blueprint. You just like, again.
So you seem to have taken a bit of a heavier weight approach here. It's everything in the kitchen sink that implies that it's not the right amount, but it's counter to some of the advice that's out there. Sometimes folks talk about, you know, wanting to have things as minimal as possible. why what you've done versus the other? How are they wrong?
Sure.
Can we start a flame war on the internet? You know, what is
Let's do it.
what,
Let's see how many Michael, you're wrong, I can get into the YouTube comments. Actually, that's not a challenge. So here's the deal. I want, especially at the beginning of this journey, when I was like, I want as much comfort and visibility as I can get in these containers and other areas, you know what I mean? And I wanted to make it as close to if I just set up a VM and just, UV, VENV, and just roll from there, right? So what I did is I said, okay, I could try to go for like the super slim Docker image, or I could just get like a basic Docker image, but then put, I put like oh my Z shell and ZSH on it, right? Does that need it? No, you could use SH, but do you know what happens when you use SH and you go in there? It's a brand new start. It doesn't remember anything any command you've ever run. It doesn't give you any help. You hit tab, it doesn't tell you nothing, right? You're like, oh gosh. But if you use like oh my Z shell, it'll show you, hey, what version of Python is your virtual environment activated in? And I can just hit Command R and see, filter all my history, and I can hit Git tab and it'll autocomplete all the Git commands that I forgot what I was supposed to use because I'm freaked out because the site is down and how do I fix this? I mean, I wouldn't actually be in the container for that, but a lot of times you're in there kind of exploring because you're like, it's been fine for 6 months, but I need to see something. And so in the book, at least in the beginning, I recommended to people that they install some of these tools that you might install into your own terminal to make you feel more comfortable. So that my assumption is you're kind of new to Docker. You're feeling a little uncomfortable. Like, who cares if it's another 100 megs on your hard drive? you're not shipping your app to Docker Hub. You're not going to take your web app, probably. It's not a reusable component. You've got your source code and you want the thing to just run here. You're not shipping it. So whoever wants to run, Indeed.com can just Docker pull that and run it. Like that's not what it is.
Yeah.
And in that context, you're not so worried about the space. And there's a couple of tips that you can use for like really, really fast build times, right? So, I mean, like container build times for me are like seconds, a few seconds. Even though, there's 250 pip install packages for Talk Python training, the build times and that's build time is also installing Python, right? Like you could make these things fast, so it's not like a huge impedance. But I think for people who are new to it, having something other than just SH, not even Bash, you're a lot better off. So that's what I promoted.
And I think it's, it kind of comes back to sort of the thesis of the book as well, right? Which is right for you. So, if you are going to be running 1,000 of these spread across a whole bunch of different cores, then if you optimize this, that might change your cost framework and everything else. Well,
right. Or if
if you're 27 on 8 CPUs works fine, then go for it. Why get in your own way?
And that advice is not like, this is why I really emphasize the context sort of thing, right? This advice is bad if your goal is to ship a container to Docker Hub so that people can self-host your open source thing.
Yeah.
You don't want that to have extra crap that they don't need. But when there's only one of them for your machine and you're building it and you're managing it, make it as comfy and helpful as possible. That's my philosophy.
The structure of your site is it has a lot of different pieces to it using different technology. You spend some time talking about like static sites and using static sites for part of it versus Python applications and those kinds of parts. How did you end up here? Like oftentimes the answer when you're looking at this kind of stuff is, well, I need a CMS for everything, and then I will try to figure out how to square peg my round hole of a CMS or whatever. Mm-hmm. So how did you end up with a collection?
Well, like many things, it starts simple, and then you're like, well, just one more thing. So I'd kept pretty much the same web framework across all my different sites, thinking, okay, that's I'm going to just pick one and go with it. I think a lot of people do that. There's people who are like, I use Django. There's people, I use Flask and so on.
Yep.
And then just slowly over time, you're like, really, this part is really a hassle. I'd be a lot better off if I made that part served through the CDN. Or why am I, one of the things that I see a lot, and it doesn't drive me crazy, but I'm just like, yeah, it's probably not necessary, is a lot of people in technology X. For us, that's Python. It could be JavaScript. It could be .NET, whatever, right? People who work extensively in that and have a lot of their identity tied into that, like I do and others. Like I'm a Python developer, right? So if I'm going to choose a tool, like let's say a CMS or a static site generator or something like that, I'm going to choose the Python one because I'm a Python person. Like, okay, but are there better options out there than the Python ones for what you're trying to do? Because are you going to extend this tool? No. Then what do you care what it's written in, right? Your operating system is not written in Python. It's written in C.
Well, I'm not going to use this word processor because it's not written in Python. Yeah.
Exactly. Just have to go back in. No, I need a new service. Like it doesn't. You don't see it. You don't have to work with it. You don't care. And so I ended up a little bit with a mishmash of just trying to say like, what are the best tools? Like for example, for the blog and some of the other static elements, I use Hugo, which is written in Go. It's like, okay, I type the command Hugo, and it does its thing. I don't really care what it's written in. The templating extension is a little bit annoying, but I kind of just went around and said, okay, well, what do I think would be the best fit to make my life easy, not to reinforce my identity as this type of developer or that type of developer,
Yeah, it's the one of the things, I'll show my own stripes here, and you can defend your beloved Flask if you like. But having come from the Django side, some of the things that you kind of learned organically here are forced on you in Django. When you like the instructions for putting together a production site are, and you will run this command and it will move all of your static content over here. So like your mental model when you come from that side is, oh, my site is actually built of at least these two different things. And I think coming from Flask, you might have sort of that discovery might have been a little more organic. You might not have been forced into it immediately, but once you've come to that realization of, oh wait, I have these pieces and I can use something like Nginx to tie it all together. That means, well, then I don't have to figure out how to use a CMS for this thing that's very unnatural for a CMS. I can just mount it under /blog and it'll work fine.
Yeah. Django is very powerful. It definitely is. And I actually talked a lot about that in the book, evaluating web frameworks. But I would say before if we're going to that, but before we do, I think your point about using Nginx to piece things together, or Caddy or Traffic or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like some front end web server.
They all do it. Yep.
Yeah. Is so often people think I have this Python app. Let's say I have a Django app. So I want to add a CMS to it. What could I possibly add? Is it static content? Well, maybe what you should add is Hugo. I don't know. I'm just making this up, right? Like it might actually be a bad option. But, well, Hugo's not a Python thing. So how do I put it into my Django app? I mean, they're very, very different in the way they work. So they don't really go that super well together. If you were to try to think like, how does one literally source code wise go into another? But if you just made like a Hugo site or other static site, however you make it, and then put it on the same server, and then in Nginx, when you say, if you go to this domain /docs, it goes completely over here. And if it goes anywhere else, it goes just to Django. And all of a sudden, from the outside, it looks like a very cohesive single thing with just different sub-URLs. But you get to choose the best technology for the static bits, and you get to choose the best technology for your dynamic data-driven bits. And that is all just done by configuring the front-end web server that you don't even have visibility to in Python. And I think that that's a big mental shift. But it's like those kinds of things that bring both the flexibility to make these choices and the simplicity to not try to jam them together where they don't go together.
There's a third-party library for Django that I use once in a while, which is called Distill. And it's a static site generator based on Django. So say you had your URL was like books, it's book/1, book/2, book/3. Well, you tell Distill, I want book and I want all the possible queries of this number, and it will generate the results as static. So even when you've got a dynamic site, you can actually carve off the static
Yeah.
portion and then have that fed straight out of Nginx. And if there's no actual dynamic content on the page, and if it only updates when the database updates or something like that, and you can do it nightly, like this gives you all sorts of other options. And to come back to my 8 processor whatever's, well, the static sites are almost free.
You do not even need that.
Right?
You don't even need it.
It's nothing. So like you can scale way down and have an absolutely mammoth site just by properly fine tuning what's dynamic and what's static.
Yeah, you could go to millions and millions of requests if you just converted all that stuff to static and then put the extra resources, CSS, image, JavaScript, etc., on a CDN.
Yeah.
I mean, that is like almost web. That's like web on easy mode right there, because it can't go down. Unless the server literally
almost can't go down.
Yeah, I mean, let's not say it. We're in the eve of are we in the eve of a fifth going down? But I mean, like it can't go down because the code is wrong, or there's a race condition, or you're out of memory. Like it's really close to just if the web server is up.
Yep.
And you put a CDN in front of it, and then it's not even necessarily that. It's like the CDN has to go. You've got to have a Cloudflare level incident.
Yeah, and fully distributed in often cases, right? So people in in continents other than where you are based are getting fantastic load times because it's cached locally for them.
Yeah, I just want to give a little shout out. I'm gonna give a shout out to Bunny.net. Like, I know people are all about Cloudflare, but this is a cool European company that focuses on privacy, has some really nice features. The pricing's great. And they have, if you go here, go to the CDN, they've got somewhere way down here, like 119 different places, including all over Africa. Like, and this is just super, super cheap for traffic. So
nice.
Yeah.
So I wasn't earlier there. I wasn't intending to force a fist fight, and we're on the opposite side of the continent, so that would be a challenge. When Django versus Flask go, but I think one of my favorite chapters was actually chapter 13, which was titled "Picking a Python Web Framework." I really liked the nuance of this. It's unusual for folks to sort of reveal their reasoning, and honestly, I think because I had no intention of tomorrow going and using Docker, the Docker chapters were interesting because I like to see how other people do things.
Yeah.
But I could grab the Picking a Python Web Framework, pull that chapter out, and hand it to almost any of my students, right? Like it's this, how do I make these kinds of decisions? How is this different? Why do I think about these things? Yeah. And so often the content on this is really just religious war. And you've done like a really, really good job there of just sort of conveying this, hey, here are pros and cons for each, and this is why I picked this, and so I really, really liked how you covered that.
Thank you so much.
What I guess it's maybe the answer's obvious, but why? Like you were fine. You were just doing configuration file after configuration file, and then a little bit of editorial. What caused you? What was the impetus for spicing it up a little?
Well, I mean, I think it's an important part of the journey is picking a technology to run your code on. So there's actually a couple of places that I kind of have that. Like I have that I'm trying to create a term here because I don't think we do a good job of disambiguating it from like Nginx of Python, like production app servers, like where your code runs. I think these are a little more disambiguation. I'm talking like Granian, GUnicorn, those kinds of things. Hypercorn, UVicorn now, right? All those places you run your Python code. So I kind of went through a debate on those from Michael's context, right? And then I did the same for Python web frameworks. And it was, I told the story of the bootstrap and how I just, every time I have to write new code, I'm like, "Ah, here we go. Like I'm in the relic and writing the relic code." I kind of felt the same way so everything was based on Pyramid, and I loved Pyramid, and I still have a lot of respect for it. The reason I chose Pyramid in 2015 was when I went to the Flask page, it said, you may potentially be able to use Python 3, but we are not supporting it and we don't recommend it. And I'm like, wait a minute, didn't Python 3 come out in 2008? That's like 7 years later. You know what? No,
Right.
I'm not doing that. Right. I'm starting this project beyond this problem, and I'm not going back to be in the mud. You know what I mean? As they've since obviously moved on from that. So Flask was out. I looked at Django and I thought, I'm really like a microservice guy. I really want to use Mongo. Like a lot of things were not quite good fits. They actually would be better fits now, right? With
Even then, no.
I know
if you want to
it's
do
not
Mongo,
as good.
that's almost a deal breaker. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, almost. And so I'm like, all right, well, maybe not Django. Well, you go to Pyramid, they're like, we are trying to embrace the latest standards. We're Python 3 first, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to give this a chance. Even though it wasn't as popular, like, this is great. And I used it for 8 years, 7 years, something like that. It was really good. But things evolved over time, right? Like Pydantic came out, and Pydantic was great. What's a really nice way to talk to the database with Pydantic? Beanie, okay? Right. So I can do Beanie, and I can do Pydantic, and wow, what a really nice, clever way to write databases. And oh, Beanie's all async only. Pyramid's synchronous only. When was the last commit to Pyramid? Oh, it was 2.5 years ago. Chances that it gets async support are low because that was just like a minor bug fix. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's just like, it's fine. Open source projects, they ebb and they flow and they come and they go. But I'm just like, I should really move this forward to something that feels like it's active, right? I don't know. Stuff in the web makes me nervous. I'm always just, did you put a port open on the internet? Well, that's scary. Yep. You know what I mean? And so a framework that felt like things were not on top of it as it could have been made me nervous. To be fair, I don't know that they had any security incidents, or very, very few, because it did so little, right? It's not like it had a bunch of admin pages or something where there's like accepting input, but still same reason. So I'm like, I really want to use these more modern tools, typing, async, Pydantic, etc. And I kind of would not like to continue building on something that feels like it's no longer being supported.
And similarly, you with Chapter 13, sort of that, the different thought process there. You also provide Chapter 15, which is a retrospective on Hetzner, which is the hosting provider that you chose. Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty clear. I think I've said it 3 different ways. My favorite stuff in the book really is sort of this, that the little insight into Michael's brain, right? Like, how did he make this decision, and how happy is he with these decisions, right? And I think that's the stuff that's globally applicable to a reader, which is nice. So it's now even a few months further on with Hetzner. So you still happy? Any regrets yet?
Yeah, no regrets. It hasn't been absolutely 100% smooth. Let's see. I could tell you how long it's been if I can get past all the ads. There we go. So I actually blogged about this, and so it's been about a year, I guess. No regrets. I would say if people are out there looking around, to me, it really, and you want to follow the philosophy of Michael, like carve yourself a space out in a multi-million-dollar data center that doesn't have anything to do with it, and you just run your code in your own space. DigitalOcean and Hetzner are the two ones, and I did DigitalOcean for a long time. When Hetzner came out, I thought they just had some really interesting appeal. Like, I started seeing a lot of people talking about them, and they are a German company, and they were just in Europe. And I'm like, I love Europe, but the majority of my customers are in the US. So What is the best place for my server? Probably the East Coast of the United States, because that serves the US really well, but then it's like one hop across the ocean to all of Europe as
Right.
well. So it's still really fast from there and so on. So I didn't want to like move my server to Europe when I felt like being closer to the US was more important. Not so much because I needed to manage it. I could SSH to wherever, but just East Coast of the US. And then they're like, hey, we have 2 new US data centers. One near Virginia, right by the US East 1, the infamous AWS US East 1. And the other one actually in Hillsboro, Oregon, just down the street from me,
Oh,
which
okay.
is funny. Yeah, it's like I could drive to it in like 20 minutes, which of all places in the world is relatively close. So I went and looked at it and I said, let me just check it out. And the prices are super cheap. You get a little bit less support and I think a little bit less top tier data center than DigitalOcean, but the prices are like insane there. Like I said, 8-core server for $30. That's insane.
Right.
And when I first signed up, that came with 20 terabytes of free traffic,
Wow.
which is about $1,700 out of AWS,
Right.
included in your $30 bill. You know what I mean? Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So yeah, I talk a lot about it in the book, but yeah, I went over and moved my stuff over there, and it's been good. I've had one incident where the machine that it was on died. The one big server, wherever it was, it died, and they had to move it, which blows my mind. Like they were able to like hot relocate it to another server, but the problem is it has an external, like a 300 gig external drive. And that didn't move location. So all of a sudden, a lot of the IO operations were much slower because they weren't close to the server anymore.
Right. Right.
Like, why did my Docker builds take 2 minutes? They used to take about 3 or 4 seconds. I cannot figure it out. And I wrote them. They're like, no, we've tested it. There's no problem. Like, I don't care what you say. There's a huge problem. And eventually there's like, we moved it again. It's fine. And then it was fine.
Right.
So,
If folks are looking for something slightly lighter weight, and this is going to sound like a commercial, I'm just a happy customer. I don't, no sponsorship or whatever, but I use OpalStack with a lot of my clients.
what do you use?
OpalStack.
OpalStack.
Yeah, and you wouldn't go full Docker with it, but they do give you access full SSH to the box. And they've got a neat little sort of packaging thing. They don't support a lot of things, but if you've got like Django or Flask or, static files for Nginx or whatever, you hit a couple buttons in the dashboard and it spawns it up. But a lot of tools like that, it spawns it up and then you're not allowed to touch it. What they do is create all the entries in the directories and then you can SSH into the box and get at the files themselves. So I find it's a nice little compromise between the two. It would not scale to what you're doing, but if folks are looking for a relatively inexpensive thing to experiment with, I find it's a nice little stopgap.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm always interested in finding those types of things. This one is new to me. This is cool.
Yeah, this is. I'm trying to remember. There was a site I used to use. It got bought. The half of the founders went, we don't want to be bought, and took their baseball bat and created OpalStack. So I used to be a client of the original and followed them along. So yeah,
Cool.
And very happy with like the service as well. They're like, you open a ticket and things are very, very human, which is nice in this day and age. I'm usually expecting to talk to a bot. So
You're getting about as much support as you get out of Gmail
yeah, exactly.
or Google Docs, like which is none. Another thing worth a shout out here is as sort of an alternate way of working with Docker and Docker Compose directly that I propose in the book is something called Coolify. Are you familiar with Coolify?
No, this one I don't know.
Yeah, this is super interesting. So what this does is it knows how to run Docker Compose, but it also gives you all sorts of like easier ways. So if people look at what I'm proposing, they're like, no, Michael, too complicated.
Right.
This is interesting because what it gives you is it basically gives you your own private Heroku or Netlify
okay.
or Vercel or Railway, or you can go in. I don't know how to find it from here, But you can also go in and say, let me find any self-hosted app.
Okay.
And they've got hundreds of them in there. And then you just type in the name and say, install this set of Docker containers as a Docker Compose file into my server. So you could create the one big server, which is your own space in someone's cloud. And then you can install this, or you can pay them $5 a month, and they'll actually manage the server, manage the deployments, do like rollouts of new versions of your app and stuff like that.
Right. Nice.
It sounds like it makes it way easier.
Right.
It actually makes it's like 2 steps forward, 1.8 steps backwards.
Right.
Because, instead of just using .env files, you've got these like a UI to enter a bunch of environment variables, and the saving of them is weird. And you're like, oh, I forgot to press save on these 3, even though I saved the page. I mean, there's just
Right.
It promises more ease than you would think, and I'm not necessarily switching. I do I've played with it some. I'm not saying I would switch to it given a choice, but it does ease you in. It's a little bit like Python Anywhere. Like, I'm sure when I started, there were things that could have gotten in my way, but the support that it gave me made it possible for me to feel like comfortable and get going. I feel like this might be an option for people who care.
Right. Nice.
But so let me give you an example. For example, I could go install an app that has Postgres, Valkey, and the web app. Then I just click install that from wherever self-hosted definition that comes from. It creates those 3 containers, and then on the container settings, or the image setting, I don't know really how you think of it. I mean, they're not. I guess it's image sort of. You can go to the web part and say, and just use this URL, and it'll automatically do the SSL generation as part of that. Then you can go to the database, the Postgres thing. You say, oh, and make backups for me daily, and store them in this S3 compatible storage. And that kind of stuff is a lot of extra when you're doing it yourself, and you just go check those boxes. So that's the 1.4, that's the 2 forward, but then there's the step back.
Yeah. Well, and that tends to be also what makes people nervous, right? So like that, and that's, I still use managed database simply because I don't want to have to think about it, right? Like, it's like, okay, I'm perfectly fine with pointing my app at a managed database and let somebody else think about backing it up and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing about managed databases that I don't like, and I can't speak to all potential hosts of them, but certainly some of them, some well-known ones, some names I've already said, if you get a managed database there, that database server is listening on the public internet. And I very much do not espouse having a database listening. It has a password, but I mean, that database, I'm always worried about what is in the database.
That's interesting. I've never thought to even check that.
And on my setup, not only is it not listening on the internet, it's not even listening on the host. There's like a private Docker network that only things in the shared Docker network can even know about or see the database. You know what I mean? So there's...
Yep. It's less likely to... fewer holes.
But I have to make backups, and if I don't, it's bad. And if it goes down, it's real bad. So, and it did one time this year. It was down for like 10 minutes. It about tore a hunk of hair out.
There goes your 6th 9. Yes.
Exactly. I know. The problem was, just for people who want to like benefit from my suffering and not suffer themselves, is I did not, on the Docker pull for the database image, I didn't pin it to a major version. And so it upgraded, and it said, well, you have old data in your file system, and we're not going to upgrade it for you automatically, so we're not going to run. I'm like, why is the database server not running? And it was like a weird update. It was like 8.2.1 that broke. Well, why? 0.1? Surely a bigger number needs to be like, this will never run again. Anyway, you find this stuff out the hard way, but
yes,
that's the negative not using a managed database.
Yes, because you have to deal with some of that kind of stuff yourself.
Yeah.
So I thought we would wrap up by reviving an old tradition. I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
What is your development environment, and what library are you excited about?
So the development environment right now is a mix of Cursor and PyCharm for sort of editing. And despite this very detailed conversation about Docker, I don't use Docker very much locally for development. I just use virtual environments. And I want to give a shout out to Hennick, who I had some back and forth about when I was writing some of this stuff that gave me some really good ideas. And he has it's a really good article, which I reference in the book, about you just use virtual environments. Keep everything consistent, right? That's an interesting debate that we don't have time for, but it's very fun. So UV, I'm a huge fan of UV.
Particularly in Docker, that makes things that much faster. Yes.
Yeah, because you can just say in your it used to be you're like, okay, well, I got to use Docker and I need to use Python. So let me use the official Python distribution for Docker because I need to have Python. And then, well, that excludes 99.9% of all the other things you could build upon that already have something that's harder to manage set up for you, right? But in your Docker file, you just say run uv venv -- Python 3.14. You've installed Python 3.14 in 2 seconds.
Right.
And it's cached, right? It's like, yeah, it makes it so much faster and so powerful, but also just in general, right? Like it's unified so many tools that I like that are just, it's all there together. And then library, oh my goodness.
Now you know how it feels like.
I know how it feels. And now
I didn't warn you on purpose.
I love it. I love it. So there are a bunch of ones I've been playing with lately, and I'm trying to think which one I've used. I don't really have a great answer to this, Chris. I'm afraid to say. I would say let's keep it flowing with some of the vibes that we had here. I would say, let me give a shout out to set proc title, which
there you go.
Sounds insanely silly. Like the goal of that is, so in your process, in your Python process, and I actually use this on a bunch of different things. In your Python process, you can say set proc title dot set title, and you give it the name of whatever you want your process to be. So why does that matter? When you pull up all these tools like Glances, BTOP, or others, anything that looks at processes, basically, instead of seeing Python, node, Postgres, at least the Python ones now have meaningful names. And you might be thinking, well, Michael, I'm not running that much in production. Useless to me. No, it's good for development too. Have you ever had the idea, like, I want to know how much memory my process is using? Is it using a lot or a little? So you pull up, activity monitor, task manager, whatever, and you see Python, you're like, oh man, I know my editor's using one of these or whatever, but which one is it?
And if you're using the right terminal, it'll change the terminal's title too, because most terminals respond to the proc name. So,
that's a very nice touch. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, but if you do that in development, if you just set the name of your process to be like, my utility or whatever the heck you call it, right? Then when you go into process management tools, like even just for Mac or Windows or whatever, you'll see it and you can see how much CPU is it using. Is it using a lot of RAM? If you got to end task it, like we now have another reason that this is something we got to do all the time is sometimes the agentic AI things go mad and they start a bunch of the web servers and then they lose track of them. And then you can't run anymore because it says port is in use.
Right.
You're like, but where? Like something in that stream of text that shot by for 5 minutes, it started one and then it left it going. But then you pull it up, it says Python, and like, well, I don't want to kill the other thing that's running. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it also gives you a way to kill off your AI abandoned stuff that it went mad on.
So there you go. Setting a process name might save you a reboot. There's your little nugget to take away from the podcast.
Exactly. It's a package with one function, but it's a good one.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me on. This has been fun to sort of reverse the tables on you. It's been great.
Yeah. Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and always great to catch up with you. Bye.
Fun to be here.